Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for joining us and welcome to the Dream Unfinished YouTube show. So today we'll be in two segments. We'll be talking a little bit about instruments for change, learning about people and resources who are really active in our New York community and abroad. And then we'll be talking about pieces yet unheard. So a lesser known masterwork by an underrepresented composer. My name is Sarah Overton. I'm the production manager for the Dream Unfinished Orchestra, and I'm joined today by Un Lee, who is the executive director and co-founder of the Dream Unfinished. So today, I think we're going to start our Instruments for Change segment just by talking a little bit about Puerto Rican statehood. And we named this episode 531 to 51 just because we were thinking about Puerto Rico and when the first colony was started on Puerto Rico, which was nearly a little bit more than 513 years ago. And then now today we're talking about the possibility of Puerto Rico being the 51st state of the United States. So, can you chat a little bit more about just kind of what we've been learning as two classical musicians trying to navigate, these democratic processes and these new waters, these new territories here?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and I will be frank in that, as we all know, Puerto Rico obviously has a very close relationship with the U.S. And Puerto Rican people who are Puerto Rican are U.S. citizens. But there is this very sort of ambiguous status that's conferred upon them. And so frankly, before Sarah and I had done more sort of homework and legwork on this, I think I had operated under the assumption that generally Puerto Ricans wanted to be admitted as a state to the US so that they could have, full, like all this sort of full status as do, other parts of the country. But this article that we found from Slate actually does a really good job of covering how this is a much more complex issue than certainly I had been aware of. And it kind of frames it as far as, first of all, like why this matters to current American politics and like where Democrats tend to fall versus Republicans, and even within the Democratic Party specifically, like why this is a divisive issue. But then it also brings up this really good point of how actually within Puerto Rico, it's not really, there are many different factions and many different sort of schools of thought around like how this could play out. So let's see, like where in the, so this is a lot around like the Democrat versus Republican sort of divide on this. But then, and the reason why this is all coming up recently is because there is now this Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act, and a previous version of which was meant to be introduced last year. It has just been reintroduced in the last, I would say, couple of weeks. So, the reason that's why all of this is in the news now. But there is this feeling amongst Puerto Ricans. I can't find it because this article is so ads. But in this article, it actually goes into great detail around, how within the Puerto Rican and Puerto Rican American community, that there is just a lot of difference of opinion. And so I, again, wasn't aware of these sorts of things, but just to put a finer point on this. So as we were saying earlier, it seems that there is this prevailing view of just this question of whether or not Puerto Rico should be a state in the country, and that this discourse is largely being pushed back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. And then there is, of course, a vocal group of Puerto Rican and Puerto Rican American, activists and politicians who are weighing on this. This is interesting though, because it is basically like under the assumption of Puerto Rico wants to be a part of the US directly, right? And I think part of the angle of a bill like this one is, the US wants to stop being colonizers and wants to stop treating Puerto Rico like a colony. But why that's ironic is because it's still being determined by the US. Whereas I think the distinction with this new bill that was introduced last year and is being reintroduced now is, so it's the Puerto Rican Self-Determination Act. So even just kind of looking at the very quick summary of both. So this is to enable the admission of Puerto Rico as a state of the Union, period. Whereas here, it's actually very different language, even though it's on the same sort of issue, a status convention through which the people of Puerto Rico would exercise their natural right to self-determination. And so that it's really not the US deciding whether or not Puerto Rico gets to be a state, but it's that Puerto Ricans get to decide what relationship they want to have with the US.
Right. And I think that especially just with the change of this language being a little bit more specific to recognize the right of the people of Puerto Rico and then to exercise their natural right to self-determination, I think is a really interesting twist of language. And it's also important to note too that if the people of Puerto Rico come together and come to a consensus about how they want to be associated with the US, it doesn't necessarily mean statehood. There are a lot of different options for the people of Puerto Rico. It could be something like free association, which is status like, former US colonies like the Palau and Marshall Islands. You could have enhanced commonwealths, be an enhanced commonwealth. It could be statehood, it could be full independence. There's a lot of directions for this to go, and it's just the opportunity and the option for the people of Puerto Rico to choose and vote on those options. And I see you've got a lot of these different options up here too.
Yeah, so exactly what you had just summarized, Sarah. This, and we can include this in the links and in the description of the clip once it's posted afterwards. But this does a good job of covering 4 of the options. What it is currently, this enhanced Commonwealth, which is sort of a more beefed up version of what it is currently. Then, of course, statehood. And then, if it wanted to just be a completely separate country. And then there is, and what's not listed in this particular summary, but we can also add here is this idea of free association. And, this article is very sort of bent, or it has an angle talking about how like free association is the only thing or the best thing. So, take that with a grain of salt. But it does do a good job of explaining what exactly free association is, because it is kind of this sort of, it does kind of come across as murky and in between its current Commonwealth status, where it has these sorts of limitations versus like full independence. So yeah, I mean, I and this is old data, but I think still, salient for the conversation. So this was a plebiscite that was held in 1998. And it's interesting to see just kind of how it shook out at that time. So, and that actually, while there was roughly 50% that had voted for statehood, there was another slightly more than 50% that voted on none of the above. So clearly this is a topic that is still, there is no unanimous sort of voice from Puerto Rico specifically, as far as like what needs to be the best option. And that's why I think the Self-Determination Act is so interesting, because it's at least putting the ball in their court versus, something like this, where again, it would be the US deciding whether or not it's admitted. And I think that this is really just kind of demanding a reframing of what the relationship is between Puerto Rico and the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are pros and cons to each. I think as we're moving forward and learning more and more about, the next steps for the people of Puerto Rico, they're exploring just kind of how these pros and cons tie into one another. I know, especially for statehood status, the Puerto Rico's population is about 3.2 million people, which is more than 20 US states, not combined, but more than, the population of about 20 different US states. And if it were to become a state, it would be eligible for 2 Senate seats and 5 House seats as a part of the United States. So just really interesting in terms of how the people of Puerto Rico want to move forward as a legislative body, either for themselves or as a part of the US, definitely.
Yeah. And I mean, as you're pointing out, Sarah, so in the same Slate article that I was able to navigate a little better despite all these weird ads. So for more recent data, there was the statehood referendum. And this was different as well because it only gave 2 options, either yes or no to statehood. And so statehood did win, but as we can see, it's by a very narrow margin of 52.5 to 47.5%. And, it does beg the question of if it was like what happened in 1998, and if there were these other options that were on the table, then, where that would leave us and what it is that is intended and what people are asking for. So, definitely wanting to just highlight that this is a topic, and similarly for what we've done in previous episodes, sharing around organizations that may not be necessarily directly related to the Puerto Rico status question, but are serving Puerto Ricans in a really important and meaningful work. The first is Taller Salud. I have terrible Spanish pronunciation. I hope that was some approximation of something that's correct. But doing a lot of really great work with Puerto Rican women specifically. And then also this group, the Artist Safety Net through, I guess it's the CERF. And they have been doing, initiatives specific to artists. So, the stat here, they've been working with more than 300 artists in Puerto Rico, largely in response to COVID specifically. But as people are also aware, unfortunately, Puerto Rico has been dealing with a real sort of cascade of natural disasters in the last couple of years. So I think that a lot of this was also, with that in context, that artists all over, but I would say in communities like Puerto Rico are especially hard hit. So we'll make sure that these links are also included in the description if folks are interested in supporting more work that's being done on the island.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are really, really wonderful resources. Thank you for sharing those. And like you said, there's so much, Puerto Rico has just such a rich and beautiful history of music, especially. And the composer that we're highlighting today, Angélica Negrón, is a Puerto Rican-born composer who is living and working in the US, in New York right now. And I mean, she is just amazing. I know both you and I have worked with her personally on different occasions. And we're just so excited about this piece that we're going to be sharing today. So the piece called Marejada, meaning storm, and related to storm in Spanish, is really a piece that's based off of latency. It was kind of composed for the Zoom era that we're in. It was composed and commissioned by the Kronos Quartet in 2020. and is really responsive to what we're experiencing as this delay in sound, as musicians trying to practice with one another over Zoom and rehearse with one another over Zoom. We're getting a lot of latency. And for our non-musician friends, non-audiophile friends, latency is just the delay between the input of an audio sound and the output of an audio sound. So it's usually measured in milliseconds. And we know in Zoom, we can't really talk over one another. The sounds and different recordings and things that we do that either diminishes or increases the sound depending on who you are. Just kind of when you're speaking. So this piece, and Angélica Negrón took all of those things into account to create something really, really beautiful for the Kronos Quartet. So she usually writes music for accordions, robotic instruments, toys and electronics, chamber ensembles, orchestras, for everything. And now writing music for Zoom, taking into account all of the complexities of Zoom. And I know you've got a little bit to share of the Kronos Quartet piece as well.
Yep. Let's go ahead and hear a little clip from it. So just such a evocative piece. I have to confess that in my pandemic stress time, sometimes I'll put this on to self-regulate and calm myself down.
That's amazing, and I think that's kind of what this piece is for. It's almost like making peace with the things that we have to deal with. How can we still make music even though there's this latency, even though there's this distance, and how can we work within those parameters? I mean, it's a beautiful concept to make music of, and she does it so well.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, so so I had assumed, because I went to Angélica's music publisher's website and said the music is not yet available. So, and as folks may have gathered from when I did the screen share, it was only premiered last fall. But as it turns out, the music is actually very widely available. So this is not really a yet unheard because it's being heard all over, but we're still happy to feature it. And so I'd actually also love to share not only where you can get the music, but then a beautiful example of another ensemble that has come to realize the piece. So first, let me just actually get this queued up. So the Kronos Quartet, who commissioned this work, they have it available on their website. And it's actually part of a larger commission series, 50 for the Future. And so they have not only the entire score and also this reference track, and also the program notes. And this artwork that we saw in the background of the Kronos musicians, they have also offered so that anyone who wants to, use these materials can make can have it be a part of their performance, which was so beautifully realized by this high school. So this was actually only just released a little over a week ago. But I just thought it would be really neat if we could listen to a tiny taste of what, a quartet sounds like, interpreted by what looks like, something like 70 high school students. So we'll take a little bit of a listen to this. So just really sweet. And I actually just noticed while I was watching this that they're all wearing black.
I love that. I love that they have performances at home. That is just the coolest thing. And talk about latency. Oh my gosh. I can only imagine with this piece that it's just the more latency, the better, the more it adds to the effect.
Really leaning into this moment we find ourselves in.
I think so. I like it. I like it a lot. It was a beautiful performance by those kids. It was Pioneer High School, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they only have 131 views. So you can we'll add to that link as well. Please show them a little love. But yeah, I mean, this is clearly meant to be out in the world for performance. So this is one of the happy instances where we're sharing music that's actually quite easy to procure the parts, and we hope that people are able to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. And one last thing that I want to add about it that I just love, the background sounds that you hear that aren't the actual instrument playing, those are field recordings from the Seven Seas Beach and Fajardo and in Puerto Rico. So it's really exciting just to kind of have these different elements of the island just really incorporated into the music. So some of this natural music as well as, just kind of string instrumental music. And I think that they're using some different instruments at the end of the piece as well. So it's just, all around really beautiful, really all encompassing, just kind of representative of this picture, this larger picture of Puerto Rico.
Yeah. And I think in so many ways, it kind of encapsulates this moment that we're finding ourselves in. Like, especially now that we're starting to see people get vaccinated and, hopefully there's some measure of herd immunity. But I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to be in these like hybrid lives. And this piece is so designed for that, with this asynchronous material of these field recordings plus the live elements plus all of these other sort of additional multimedia layers and and I think that it's certainly none of us wanted the pandemic, but one of the strange sort of silver linings or gifts that have come out of it is that we are now so connected more with there's a lot less friction, I guess, around like having these kinds of like just being connected, I guess, across vaster distances. Because I mean, Sarah and I are only a borough away from each other, but we're still in this Zoom format instead. So, you know, like it's just in that way, it's sort of weirdly opened up doors for different kinds of collaborations and connections to be made.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. So, you know, we'll definitely be sure to drop all of those links within this kind of video, this YouTube video, so that everybody can find the score if they're interested. If you have a high school orchestra of your own and you want to perform it, you know, it's a wonderful piece, and definitely those resources that we mentioned earlier from Taya Salud, and just kind of you know, making sure that we have all of these things available for you. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Please come back next week. We're going to continue this exploration of activism and classical music and how the two intersect. Please hit the like and subscribe button. We're so happy that you're here, and we hope that you'll come back. And drop us a comment if you have any questions or suggestions, or just want to, you know, be a part of the TDU universe. We are always happy to hear from you. So thank you again, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.